Okay, I think we're ready to go. Hi, I am Patrick Gould with Software AG out of our infamous Dallas office, and would like to welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to have more than 120 attendees registered to hear both Kathy Jackson and Colby Holmes from the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts team share their experience with implementing NaturalONE successfully. Because we have such a large audience today, we ask that you please enter your questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A section. On the right-hand side of the screen, we will provide attendees a link to today's presentation and recordings, as well as the full Q&A topics early next week. Again, if you didn't see my earlier message, if you're having difficulty seeing or hearing the presentation today, please exit and rejoin using the Chrome browser. And just be sure to test your audio and video connections if prompted before hitting the join button. And I'm very pleased, and I will pass the baton to Kathy, who I've worked with for many years, who will be starting today's webinar. Have fun.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. We've worked with NaturalONE for probably over 10 years now. Tried to bring it on board early because we had a programmer that was interested in the service development aspect of it. And I was happy that we started working with it early after hearing the announcement that Software AG was going to make it the primary editor for Natural. I have had conversations with various individuals on in the SAGL community, both online in SAGL and offline. And I'm hearing that a lot of people are having struggles with programmers wanting to come on board and switch their primary edit. So the beginning of this presentation is going to provide you abilities that you could maybe do a presentation at your own shop to get your programmers on board so that they don't fear the change, basically. I'm going to run through the first few slides. You'll be able to download the slide deck so you can make use of these slides if you so choose in your own shop. But these are just to give you a few ideas. Don't want to dwell on the first few slides because I'm sure you're here to get more the meat of how do you set up your NaturalONE and Ndv environments, which I will cover in the presentation. So basically, there's two opinions on implementing NaturalONE. You're going to have in your shop the change opposers who ask why do they have to learn another tool. They think it's going to slow them down, and they want to know what's it going to buy them. If they have to change, is there a benefit to them? And then you have the change embracers that they want to know if it's one of the new Eclipse-based tools because they're starting to like those. And some of them get excited. They want to know, why don't I have it already? When am I going to have it? And then they want to know, well, what can I do in that tool that I can't already do in my 3270 environment? So what do you do to ease the change opposers? You're going to have people complaining that they're too busy to learn this new tool. So one of the ways you can do that is to take them down memory lane. Remind them that they've changed before, and then highlight some of the new features. Anybody remember years and years ago? I won't take you back as far as punch card machines, but a lot of us started out our careers where we showed up at the office, we sat down at a desk, and we had a monitor and a keyboard. And that was connected somehow through the walls and the wires to your mainframe computer. And that's all you had. You were looking at screens that had black backgrounds and some color, green. That might have been the most exciting color you had. Some people had an amber color. Then along came PCs. And when we got PCs, we got graphics were better. We had new storage options. Instead of just an internal drive, you started having options for external hard drives. You had CDs, DVDs, flash drives, servers, and now we can store data in the cloud. So we've had various technology changes from our desktop units that we were using every day. And we somehow survived all those changes. And eventually, even if you complained when you first got the change, you finally had to admit you liked some of the changes. When you got the PC, now you could store data locally. Prior to that, you just could store anything on the mainframe. And with PCs came new software options, such as TN3270 terminal emulators, QW3270, Blue Zone, Extra. There are a variety on the market. They had fun colors, and now users could actually customize their user experience. We felt like we were delving into the sci-fi technology when we were suddenly able to dial in via modems to the office from PCs we had at home. And initially, I remember my first dial in was a 2400 baud modem. Then came the 9600 baud modems, and I thought, wow, I'm flying now. If we had to do work today on a 9600 baud modem, we wouldn't get a whole lot of work done, I venture to guess. But with these software emulators, there were so many configurations. It was just so much that you could do as a user. And you ask, well, what can I customize and where do I start? But then as you played with each software tool that you had, you started learning what your customizability options were. And we started to embrace these new capabilities because we could make our user interface something that was comfortable to us. And some people embraced it faster than others. I think most of us had a show off in our shop that would be the first to learn the tool and brag about what all you could do with it. But I, for one, loved when someone would share with me what a new tool could do. And we all became proficient in maintaining natural code in 3270 emulator environments. These started out back in the 80s, late 80s and 90s. Yes, it was that long ago. Then along came laptops, and we could go wireless and mobile. And we soon had to learn if we're going to be so mobile, we need to start protecting our traffic. So we had to learn how to use VPN. The point is, there have been so many technological advances in the past few decades, and we all conquered the learning curves along the way. So, yes, you can all continue to learn new tools. This is something you need to convince your program shop that they've been through many changes. They can be okay coming out the other side of having to implement NaturalONE in your shop. So NaturalONE, we now have the new Eclipse-based tools like Software AG Designer with NaturalONE and Service Development Perspectives. Software AG Designer is basically your Eclipse shell. And NaturalONE is going to be the tool that connects to your mainframe and basically acts like a 3270 emulator and is your code editor tool. The service development perspective, I won't cover in this presentation. I just want you to know it's available because it seamlessly allows you to, to point at a natural subprogram, make a few clicks, and you can generate a web service. Whether it's a SOAP web service or a REST web service, it's very easily done once you have NaturalONE implemented in your shop and you have that service development component installed as well. So as with any Eclipse tool, there's even more options and features to learn. I think out of all the software I've worked with over the years, Eclipse-based tools have the most options for the user preferences to set. It is a learning curve, but you got to start somewhere. So the answers you could provide to the questions that were asked earlier, the change of posers. Why do we have to learn another tool? Well, the main reason is because Software AG has announced there will eventually be an end of life for the mainframe 3270 editor. They would have liked it to have already been ended, but they know that this is a big change for a lot of customers. The learning curve will slow me down. Well, it may first. It slows everyone down when you're working with a new tool. But if you handle it right and develop and offer hands-on training to your programmers, they will accept it more. And you will actually give them a kickstart and they will learn it faster. What benefit is the tool to me? Well, in NaturalONE, you'll be able to do things like expand and contract source lines. You can use an outline mode that sits on the right-hand side or anywhere on the screen that you place it, and you can jump to a section of code by just looking at the outline. You can right-click on an object in the dependencies list and easily pull that object into your project. It's got a lot of features like that. The change embracers, of course, you just tell them, yes, it's an Eclipse-based tool, and it allows users to customize their development workspace a lot. They're going to be excited about that. When do you get to use the new tool? You need to let them know that as a natural administrator, DBA, you're going to be installing the tool and configuring the tool, and you need a little time to make sure it's working in your environment. Later on, I'll give you some tips that I recommend that you pick a couple of programmers to work with and get the tool implemented and get all the kinks worked out so that it's a smooth implementation for all of your remaining programmers. What will I be able to do in the tool that I can't do in my 3270? Well, in addition to what was listed above, you can expand your source editing window size on demand, something we couldn't easily do on the 3270 environment. You can also step through your code while seeing the variable contents in the same workspace when you're using the debugger that comes with NaturalONE. There's many more things you can do in NaturalONE, and um, you'll have a static code editing demo coming up later. We chose to do it static for this presentation so that you'll have the demo right there in slide form. And the person that's going to do the demo, I call a change embracer. He was one of the first ones to get in and really like the tool and learn it well. And he developed training in our shop for the other natural programmers, which got them on board much quicker. And I recommend you do the same in your own shop. So how do I connect this NaturalONE Eclipse tool that's running on my laptop or desktop to my mainframe natural environment? The method of interface connection is going to be an Ndv server. For those of you that are familiar with RPC servers, an Ndv server is similar to an RPC server in that it's a task running on your mainframe that listens for work. It listens specifically for commands coming in from one that is sitting on all of your laptops and desktops as the NaturalONE programmers are sending in check, save, stow commands. The Ndv server grabs these commands and performs the function on your mainframe server environment. So you could think of NaturalONE almost as a software emulator that is your code editor. The way that you specify once you have your Ndv server connecting your mainframe to your NaturalONE clients, um, you specify your mainframe network alias or IP address and the Ndv assigned port number in a server connection. Later on, Colby's going to demo how you map these connections from your NaturalONE client to the specific Ndv server that is defined to be mapped to a certain mainframe natural environment. There are two flavors of Ndv servers. You can run an Ndv server as a batch job or start a task. You can also run an Ndv server that has a CICS adapter. If you're running the Ndv server as a batch job, it listens for testing commands, comes from the NaturalONE client, and executes the command in its own batch session. So Ndv is the batch natural environment in this case. You can also run Ndv server with a CICS adapter, And in this case, the Ndv server will listen for the code editing and testing commands coming from NaturalOne, and it will pass those commands to your natural CICS environment, and your natural CICS environment will execute those commands. You can use the same natural CICS environment that you're using today. This is a sample configuration of how we have Ndv servers configured at the Texas Controller's office. It's only some of our servers, but you'll get the point. We have a development environment on the mainframe that has a batch Ndv server defined and a CICS Ndv server defined. And as you can see, for the batch server, the NaturalOne client will pass a command to the batch server, and that natural command will be processed in this natural batch environment, and it will perform the code edits on the system file that is your development environment. For the CICS configuration, NaturalOne will pass the command to your Ndv server, and that will pass it on to your natural CICS environment that will perform the functions check and save and stow and edit and list and all of the functions that you're doing from your NaturalOne client. Our batch Ndv servers, we have staying up from IPL to IPL. Our Ndv servers that are running with the CICS adapter are brought down when each CICS region goes down and is brought up. This is an example of a chart that we hand out to our NaturalOne users that makes it very simple for them to map their NaturalOne server environments. We suggest that they use the environment names on this chart just to make it easy for everyone to be using the same environment name, or when they call the natural administrators for help, we can say, well, which environment type are you using? Are you using the batch or the CICS development environment? We also have sysparm profiles that we built for them to connect their NaturalOne client with, just so that we make sure what natural parameters they're connecting in with. There may be a time that you have a user that you need to tweak a natural parm in their NaturalOne connection. And these natural sysparms are actually the default sysparms we have defined to the Ndv servers. But if you need to work with a NaturalOne programmer and test something new, you can simply build them another sysparm profile and ask them to change their server mapping to your new sysparm profile to test that new option out just for that single user. So it's very flexible in the connections to the mainframe. You may or may not be able to see this clearly. What I did in this presentation is I made the text that you see on this screen, which is a sample of a batch Ndv server that we have running as a started task. And I've highlighted some of the things that you need to make sure you configure. I did make the text in this slide. When you download the slide deck, you'll be able to actually grab the text. It is a text box. So if you so choose, you can grab the text and actually paste it into your own environment and tweak each of these parms as you need. You can change your load libs to your load libs. Just know that when you're building an Ndv server, you will be running the program equal nat r devs. You will need to have a natural nucleus built specifically for Ndv, just like you would have a natural nucleus built for a natural RPC server. And that nucleus is specified here in, sorry, the slide keeps going, right here in the execution parameters. You will want to include the time zone adjustment. If you don't include that, you're going to get not the same time zones in your sysout for your Ndv server. There will be a configuration file that has all of your Ndv NapParm settings that you need to set for your particular environment. So this is a sample of a batch Ndv server. I'm going to switch to the CICS version. It looks pretty much the same. Where you're going to see the differences in the configuration file. Everything else is pretty much the same, except you're going to adjust your load libs accordingly. But your Ndv server configuration file will have the differences between the batch Ndv server and the Ndv server with CICS adapter. I'm not leaving you high and dry. I'm going to give you the differences in this presentation. So this is a sample of what we have set in our batch Ndv server versus our CICS, our Ndv server with the CICS adapter. In both cases, you're going to want to use security mode impersonate. If you don't use impersonate, then when you perform a save or stow in NaturalONE, it won't save or stow under the signed on user's ID. It will save or stow under the user ID to your Ndv server. So you definitely want that security mode impersonate. Otherwise, your NaturalONE users will not be held accountable to what they can and cannot do in natural security per natural library. You'll also want to make sure you use terminal emulation 3270. We had a situation where that got switched somehow to WebIO, and we couldn't figure out why the Ndv servers with the CICS adapter was acting differently when the NaturalONE users were executing their code editing sessions. We finally figured out that the terminal emulator mattered, and it had gotten switched to WebIO. When we switched it back to the 3270, then they went back to functioning as they were used to functioning when they were working on the mainframe. You'll notice on the CICS adapter, you'll see that a transaction named NRFE. That is the transaction the Ndv server will pass all work to in your natural CICS environment. So you'll have to define that NRFE transaction to your natural CICS regions that you're going to connect to. And you'll also have to give it your natural CICS front-end program name so that it knows that that NRFE will start your NCI natural nucleus when it receives each command. The other thing you'll want to do is you'll want to pick one of your Ndv servers. We happen to pick an Ndv server that's used off in a sandbox environment that we keep up all the time, or you can take it up and down. But when you have that Ndv server running, if you put HTTP-mon port, a port number, and a admin password, then this server can be used as a browser interface to view all of your running Ndv servers. It's a really neat tool. Make sure you choose an Ndv server that you can have made available at all times. This HTML monitor, you basically, once you define the parameter in one of your Ndv servers, you just simply go to a browser, you type in your host name on your mainframe computer's host name, colon, and then the port number that you assigned in that previous screen as your HTTP-mon port equals number. Once you enter that in your browser and hit enter, you're going to see the natural server list. It's going to show you all of your Ndv servers that are running. So if I need to look at who all is running in my development server, I go to my Ndv Server Monitor. I click on the development server, and I get a screen like this that shows me all of the sessions that are running. If I wanted to cancel a session, if a programmer calls and says my session's hung and I can't do anything and I want to cancel their session, I just go find them in the list and it will show it by their user ID. This is just a sample screen, but it will have your user's user IDs here. You just click on their session ID and click cancel session, and you'll get a pop-up screen in which you have to enter the password that you had set on your HTTP monitor admin password. At that point in time, that session will disappear, and they will have to reestablish their server mapping in their one tool. The other thing I like about this browser monitor for the Ndv servers is that in the configuration function, you can dynamically change the Ndv server trace options. That is a very nice option, and it's going to be helpful to you when you're first setting up your Ndv servers, especially when you have to open a support request with Software AG. They may say, can you turn a certain trace option on? Well, if you already have your Ndv servers up and running and a few users using them, you don't want to bring your Ndv server down and back up to change that. So this will allow you to dynamically change that and still provide the output that Software AG is asking you for to help you with your issue. What are the prerequisites and the restrictions for the Ndv Server CICS adapter? We struggled to get the CICS adapter to work with our Ndv Server for a variety of reasons. Once we went through the manual with a fine-tooth comb, opened a few logs, got a little bit more information that is all now in the manual. All of this information is in your manual, so go through with a fine-tooth comb. Make sure you have all of these options configured when you're setting up your Ndv server with CICS adapter. You'll be able to download this slide deck so that you can go through each one of these. Doesn't make much sense to anybody unless they're in there looking at the parms at the same time that you're reviewing these. I just wanted to highlight these as options you need to make sure you care about. You'll find real quick that the NaturalONE will want to go mainly by the utility security definitions that you have in the natural security environment of the mainframe server that you're connecting each server mapping to. So if you have a server mapping in NaturalONE that goes to your development environment, it will use the natural security that you're mapping to in your development environment. Whatever you have your utility definition set to for sysddm and sysair and sysobgh, those are the main three. NaturalONE will honor the security that you have defined for every user in your mainframe natural security environment. But you need to have these utility securities set up so that NaturalONE can read the natural security that you need to have set for these particular functions, like copyings, like if you're still using sysmain or sysobgh. If you have a sysobgh security option that says someone cannot copy from a certain place to another place, it will honor that as long as you have these definitions set. External security configuration. This is very important because a lot of functions won't work, like impersonation might not work if you don't have this external security set up. The BPX server security, setting the RALT program definitions. Don't forget when you're working with your security personnel to have the refresh command done. Sometimes they'll put the commands in and it won't activate right away. So make sure you know if something isn't working and they said they defined it, ask them to do the refresh command. You cannot use aliases in these RALT program definitions. It has to be the hard libraries. So you may not want to name your implementation libraries with a version number. If you implement your natural load libraries with version numbers in it, then every time you upgrade, you have to re-update these security definitions. So you might want to come up with a standard non-version when you're creating load libraries for the NDV environment. Each client connecting to the server must be defined in RACF, and they must be granted to use the ZOS Unix system services. You will need, just like the natural global buffer pool needs to have the authorized services manager running, you will need that also for the impersonation piece to work. Most natural shops now, I believe, have the authorized services manager running because of the global buffer pool being in system services. You'll also need a natural role server. We normally roll to main memory for our CICS, but this facility natural role server defined or some things don't function correctly. So we threw a natural role server up and everything was working fine. One of the main questions I get asked, that I got asked early by the natural programmers was, well, now how do I debug my natural code in one? Because they can see there's a debug perspective in the tool, but it's somehow they couldn't get it to work correctly. So I worked on trying to get some type of debug working. And then I was told by Software AG that, well, if you're debugging CICS for sure, you probably want to run a debug attached server. What this server does is it runs on the local client. You start it by running a script on your local client that starts up the debug attached server. And then both your Natural One session, you'll set some parameters in that session, and then you'll tell it to attach to that debug attached server. And then you'll do your testing on the mainframe, but you'll log into the mainframe and you'll have to start up a debug mode. That debug mode, when you start it up, it will attach itself to the debug attached server running on your local client. Then when you start your mainframe natural program, through that debug attached server to your Natural One client, allowing your Natural One client to step through your mainframe program. It has a two-way interface so that if you're working in Natural One and you pull up some source code, you'll be able to set breakpoints in your Natural One source code. And the mainframe natural program, because it was started in debug mode, it reads those debug breakpoints from that debug attached server, and it will execute till it hits the first breakpoint. And at that point in time, you see everything that happened on the mainframe in your Natural One debug perspective. Additionally, you will also see the contents of the variables right next to the source code as it's stepping through the source code. In the demo later, Colby's going to show you a slide that demonstrates use of the debugger, and it shows you how the variables look when you're using the debugger. If you need help using or setting up the mainframe debug attached server debug environment, you can contact me offline. I do have some other presentations that are ready to share that can walk you through what you need to do on the mainframe environment to set that up. I'm still waiting for a user API from Software AG. I have the program that they gave me, but they informed me that they will be into one of the mainframe natural APIs that start with USR. So my instructions will change once that API becomes available. There is a video that I recommend shown on this slide. It doesn't necessarily handle the debugger like the presentation that I have available to share does, but if you watch this tutorial, it will show you some of the features of the debugger and what you can do while you're using the debugger, how to step through a program, how to display your variables, how to change variable content and continue on stepping through the programs. That is a good tutorial to recommend to your programmers to watch. If my schedule allows, hopefully in the future, we can do another presentation just like today's presentation that shows you how to debug attached server debug environment on the mainframe, and also how to connect to it from NaturalOne. But we don't have time today in this presentation because I want time to do his demo. We had some issues setting up NaturalOne because we were such early adopters, but we worked with SAG over the. They've made a lot of changes that improve the tool, so it's working pretty good for us now. Again, if you're implementing one in your shop, I would recommend that you select 1 or 2 natural programmers to be early users and have the programmer and the natural administrator work together to establish all of the Ndv server configuration parameters that you're going to need. Start off with the sample that I showed in the earlier slide and then work from there. That would probably speed you along quite nicely. Let's see. We did initially deploy to 30 plus programmers on our first mass deployment. I think we have over 30 now, maybe over 40 now using it. Rollout of 911 went more smoothly than our first attempt. And we had 911 that had a few bugs still in it. We had a lot of map bugs. When SAG sent us NaturalONE 912 Fix 8, it resolved almost all of the map issues and every other issue that we had reported prior to that. Right now, I think you can get at least 913, if not 914. I haven't checked lately to see if 914 is out or a newer release. Maybe Patrick would know what's available now. I would just suggest you start with the latest release, as is the normal rule for any Software AG product. What we did when we had issues in one was we kept using one, which meant that our mainframe the natural CICS and the natural batch environments had to use the NaturalONE license key when we went to version 9 of Natural. That's how Software AG has it all configured. However, we did ask for a special license key that still enabled the 3270 editor, but we are only installing that license key in the natural TSO environment because NaturalONE does not need to connect to a natural TSO environment. Whatever environments on the mainframe your NaturalONE needs to connect to, starting Natural version 9, that version must be using the NaturalONE license key for you to have the unlimited versions of NaturalONE. Dave Kelly was a former natural administrator that worked with us till June of this year over creating the install scripts for our NaturalONE clients and deploying them out to the 30 plus programmers that we've been working with. He emailed me earlier this month and said, I found a better way to deploy. He suggests that you use the section of the NaturalONE manual called Preparing a Deployment Package. That's going to be your quickest way to deploy to the masses. Prior to using the SUM or Software Update Manager to install fixes, Dave tells me that if you use that deployment package, it may be a little easier to even deploy fixes. I haven't done it myself, so I'm going on Dave's advice on this one. Recommendations: always install the latest release that you can. So currently we have the majority of NaturalONE programmers are using 912 Fix 8. However, we have, I think, 5 people that have 913 installed, and the 913 has a performance enhancement in it. It also has DDMs relocated in the server structure, but I think the programmers are going to enjoy the performance enhancement that comes with version 913. At the end of Colby's presentation, I'll include a recommendation for another training opportunity that you guys can take advantage of. But this concludes the part that I need to present. I want to give Colby some time to run through his demo. In the slide deck that you can download, you'll have access to these email addresses that you can submit emails to after the presentation is over with. So Colby Holmes is going to present, like I said, the static demo and give you some tips. He happens to be one of the change embracers. He adopted it early. He got to learn the tool. He developed the training, presented the training to every one of our natural programmers. Colby and Greg is one of the earliest adopters of One. Greg is the person that was interested in using the service development component to generate web services. They continue to be the go-to people that when we have programmers that have a problem with Natural One, if they can't get a hold of one of the natural administrators, they'll contact Colby or Greg. So with that said, Colby, you're on. Time to shine.
Good morning, everyone. As Kathy said, I'm Colby Holmes. I hope y'all can hear me fine. I had a small technical difficulty at the beginning of Kathy's presentation. My VPN pushed an update and kicked me offline for a few minutes. I was sweating. But yeah, thank you, Kathy, for opening up and warming up the crowd for me. Thanks, Nicole and Patrick, for hosting. And I'm going to give y'all a static demo of Natural One. So Kathy's driving for me. If you could move on to the next slide. So this demo is going to go over a lot of setting up. I know that a lot of people in the natural community have been using the 3270 forever and aren't very versed with Eclipse products. Lucky for me, prior to joining the CPA, I was doing a lot of Eclipse-based editing, and so I knew a lot of this going in. But the first thing we're going to go over is the IDE. There are three main things, but there are two main terms that might be unfamiliar, which are perspective and view. And then the third thing we're going to go over for the IDE is the preference and settings. You can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So the first thing is the perspective. In Eclipse, a perspective is the layout of the Software AG Designer, which is the Eclipse editor for Natural. And it is the visual layout of all your internal windows, which are called views. Each perspective is focused around a specific working goal. So there is a Natural One perspective that when you install is going to be the main one that you look at pretty much all the time. Then there's a debug perspective also, which if you set up the natural debug attach server, you will use that one as well. And you can change that by going through window perspective, open perspective to pick any that you like. There's tons of others, but we usually only touch those two. If you look at this screenshot, up in that right-hand corner, it keeps open all of your recent perspectives, and there's little icons for them in the corner. I know it's kind of small on your screen, but there is a blue N1 box, and that is the Natural One perspective. So if that's highlighted, you know you're where you're supposed to be. You can move on. Thank you. So views are the individual windows that comprise the perspective. They each have a very distinct purpose. Each perspective contains a series of views, and they're intended to be most useful for that purpose. The ones that you already have on the screens, they can be freely moved around. Eclipse is very user-friendly in that you can drag around these views within the perspective as much as you want. And you can actually drag views out of the Eclipse editor and have them open in a separate window, say if you have separate monitors that you want to spread your stuff out on. You can open up any views that don't exist in a perspective already, or ones that you might have closed out by mistake, by going through the window, show view, and then selecting other, and it'll pull up a list so that you can do that. If you ever make a mistake and close something, you don't know what it was called, or you just want things to go back to however they originally were, you can reset the perspective by going through the Windows command perspective, and there's a reset perspective option just to change things back to how they originally were. And in this screenshot, I just highlighted a couple of the views. Obviously, the whole screen is comprised of them, but some main ones that you'll see are up in the top left. There's Navigator and Natural Navigator. Those are pretty similar. I prefer the Natural Navigator. It shows the local folders and their connection points to your server side, your mainframe side. But any programs that you have open locally, you will see in there. And then down below, you'll see the console. It'll show you, what's going on there. Later, we will go over using the console to run things just like you would in the 3270. And in the top right is the outline. So when you have your program open, it'll give you a brief outline of the layout. All right, preference and settings. In Eclipse and Software AG Designer, there are a ton of settings that you can customize to change your experience. I know a bunch of the old heads with the 3270, they were really excited because you can change the colors in the ID there, and that's about it. But in this, you can change just about everything. So if you go through Window and Preferences, you will open up that pop-up box, and in there's a keyword search that I highly recommend if you're looking to change something in particular, because like I said, there's probably several hundred settings, and that's a little daunting, I know, but there's a few key places that we'll go to that are the main ones that you'll look at whenever you're trying to fix things. And if ever you change something and you don't like it, or it did something that you aren't sure, there are restore default options just so you can go back to what you had before. And here are some screenshots of the preferences. So on the left-hand side is the main preferences window. It opens up in general, and each one of those has a little caret icon where you can drop down. And there are many layers to each of these setting types. Like I said, there's a lot to go over. But if you look on the right-hand side, you can use that search. And I just used case translation as an example, and it will go down through the list and pull up anything that uses that. So there's a case translation in the natural source editor. Some of my recommended settings, one thing that I really like is changing the print margin column. So in the general editor settings, you can show the print margin and you can change it to 72. This is the maximum length that the 3270 editor allows for natural. And so you don't really want your programmers to be editing past that. Otherwise, if you look at the code on the 3270, it'll show you an arrow that there's more off to the side, but it won't show you what it is. You can see it on the NaturalONE editor, and that's fine. But you really don't want to be coding out of the visible range, which Eclipse allows. I think they might have patched this. I'm not sure. And then the next setting would just be show line numbers. These aren't the natural line numbers, which you can show, but you can't get them listed like you can with line numbers. That's just a personal preference. The third one, this one is very important. So if you go to the Software AG Natural settings and click on the Project tab, you want to make sure that handling of missing objects is set to read from server. This should be done by default, but if it's not, it'll cause problems when you try to run your programs through the console, because if you try to run a program that has a call nat to a sub program and that isn't locally held and you aren't reading from the server, it'll throw an error because it can't find it. The next one is the case translation. There's multiple different case translation tabs that you can change. I suggest just going with what you like or what's recommended by your office. As far as you can change comments, you can change code. Obviously, you want all your code caps, but maybe you want your comments to have case sensitivity. And then the other option that I say to look at is to go to the Software AG Natural Editor Source Editor tab. There are a lot of things in that tab that are relevant to everyday work that you might just have personal preference on. All right, so getting started. Whenever you first load up NaturalONE, the first thing you're going to be doing is mapping environments, preferably adding filters to those environments so you're not seeing everything that your office holds. And then you'll be mostly editing new or existing objects. I assume this is how our office works, but every now and then creating new objects. So you'll need to know how to do that as well. When you're mapping environments, when you first boot up Designer, you won't have any connections in your natural servers view. and you'll need to set those up. To create these connections, you need to go to the natural server view, which on the original screenshot, I believe is in the lower left-hand side. Like I said, Eclipse is very playful and you can move things around, and I use the natural server pretty much for my full left side view. And in that, you'll see that little computer icon I pasted there is what you're looking to click on, and that'll pull up the map environment pop-up, which allows you to enter the credentials for any mapped environments that your office contains. If you click on the next slide, thank you. Yeah, so I put an arrow next to that icon. Like I said, it was pretty small, so I blew it up on the previous slide. But it will pull up this pop-up that's on the right-hand side that allows you to enter the host name, the port number. Environment name defaults to whatever the host is, I believe, but you can enter whatever you like for that, whatever lets you know that this is your development CICS or this is your development batch. And then below that, you can enter in the credentials, the session parameters, and your credentials for your user ID and password. All right, adding filters. So once you have your servers mapped, you can add filters so that you don't see, all of the folders, all of the subfolders. You can add these filters to every level of your environment. And these can be very specific or contain wildcard characters. They're inclusive, so when you create one, it is a list, and you can add more things down. You can add as many filter things to the container filter, basically. You will see on the next slide what it looks like. And each filter only applies to the current level, not its subfolders, so that you can kind of define things as you go down. To set that up, you'll see this arrows icon in the natural server view. It's pretty much right next to that computer icon that we listed before. And once you do this, the define filters pop-up will appear. You can add the filter's name and then define the selection limits. After you're done specifying the filter parameters, you can click OK. It'll close that menu, and then you'll right-click any library you want to add the filter to and select Set Filter. All right, here we go. So I again highlighted where that icon is because they're a little small on the screen. But if you look on my natural server view, you will see a list of user libs, and within that, all the different types of copy code, error messages, anything that's in there. If you look at the define filters, I have a libraries filter, and within that, I have several patterns, which are what it's actually filtering on. So mine is very specific. I don't have any wildcards in there. On the first one that's to the left and a little bit overlaid, I just have a pattern on that one for XIT codes. And that one will pull up anything that leads with XI and nothing else. And once you select the filters, you click OK, and it will filter down and only reveal the things that list in it. So next is the main thing that your programmers will be doing, and it's editing existing options or objects. To open up an existing object, all you have to do is find it in your natural server view by going down the folders, library, type, and then whatever the object name is, and double click it. And this will pull a local copy to your computer. But if you save or stow it, it will automatically save or stow on the mainframe side. And you can see all the objects you have locally in either your Navigator or Natural Navigator view. Like I said, they're fairly interchangeable. I prefer the Natural Navigator one. One of the things that you can do is you can right-click and save or right-click and stow, but I prefer to use the keyboard shortcuts, which are Control-S and Control-T, respectively. So as you can see here in my Natural Navigator view, I have all of my Software AG demo modules, and I'm just listing in the right-click view the save and stow options. The new map editor is probably the most different thing to the 3270 editor. And as Kathy mentioned, in the 9.12 fix 8, I believe, they put in a lot of good stuff to make it a little bit more accessible, work a little bit smoother. There's new tools for moving fields across the map that are much easier than the dot commands, to me at least. I'm a new head. I don't think I mentioned, but I use the 3270 editor for about 8 months. So I don't have those many years of experience that a lot of natural programmers have using the 3270 over the new system. But you can use the select tool to drag and drop fields around the map, and you can use the Marquee tool to select an area of fields, and then you can drag and drop those. New text fields are created using text constant, as variables are created with the data field. And then the properties view is used to manipulate the properties of the map as a whole or select the data field. So the way that the properties view works when you're viewing a map is if you don't have any variables or text fields selected on the map, it will work as the properties for the map as a whole. But if you have clicked on any objects on the map and have them currently selected, it will be the properties for that field. And then the outline view lists all the text and data on the map in order of appearance from left to right, top to bottom, so you can easily find any variables. Here's my example map. And if you look, I have highlighted on the top left highlight is the palette, which shows you the tools that I listed, the select, the marquee, the basic controls for creating text constants, and data fields. To the right of that is the outline, which, as I said, lists all of the things on your map. Text constants, and scroll down would be variables, but can't see them in there. And since I have nothing selected, if you look on the bottom, the properties will be the properties of the map as a whole and not the properties of a variable. Okay, so editing data areas. LDAs, PDAs, and GDAs can be assembled manually if you would like, but there's a way to import DDM fields directly, and it was a little bit confusing for some of our users to figure this out, but it is very useful if you don't want to manually type in all your fields when you have a large DDM. So to directly import the fields, you need to open a local copy of a DDM. And that's fairly easy. You do it through the natural server. You just find it in the library and you're good to go. So then you right click inside of that data area and go to Advanced Edit Features, and there's an Import Data Fields option. From there, it'll open up a dialog box to select the DDM you want to import. And after you select it, it will load in all of the fields from the data area, and you can select any of the ones that you want. I believe it has a select all. You probably see it on the next slide. So there's the example of going to the advanced edit features and importing the data fields. And then the second box is the pop-up box where I have this DDM and it lists all of the objects inside of the DDM, which you can select all, deselect all, or manually go in and select which ones you want. And when you click OK, it will import those into your LDA or GDA. Adding new objects. Okay, there are many ways to link a new object to an existing library, but in my opinion, the best way to do this is to have any local copy of an object in that library. I'm not sure how y'all's shops operate, but we have a main library that we use for most of our code. And so most of the time you have something local open anyway. But if you don't, you just go into the library, click on any program to open it up so that you have the local folder in the Navigator or Natural Navigator view. And once you're there, you can right click on the library, click on new, and then you select the object type. Once you have the object type, a dialog box will pop up and all of the necessary connections will be handled. You just need to name it, versus you can do this the other way, which is you manually type in all the connections. And that's a lot of information that you don't need to memorize when you can just have something open already. When you save it or stow it, it will immediately already be on the mainframe side in the library that you chose. So here I have something in our training library on our CICS side, and I just right click the library new, and then from there I created a new program. It pulls up this pop-up box, and all I have to do is type in the object name and it'll create it for me. All right, section 3. From here, we're going to talk about using the console and briefly about the debugger. As Kathy said, that's something for a whole nother presentation. So using the console, I again have blown up that image so that y'all can see it and recognize it. Programs that you currently test from the command line in mainframe natural can be tested from the command console. But you don't have to do that. This is a note that I made. You can actually still test your programs on the CICS side. A lot of our users do that. The command console is a good emulator, but if you like the old way, you don't have to switch over. If you use any, at this point, I don't know what Software AG plans to do in the future. If you use any custom natural CIS front end or back end processing, you must test using the debug attach server and in order to include the custom processing in the execution. If you are looking to run programs in NaturalOne, you can use the natural command console for mainframes. So in the console view, you can click on the window icon, the one that I blew up in the little image there, and it'll pull up the different consoles that you can open, and you will select the natural command console for mainframes. This will create an online session just as if you were logged on to the mainframe CICS environment. It's very similar to the 3270 editor. In fact, there's an option to make it the same colors as ours, the default 3270 editor colors. The library that you're logged onto is the last one that you selected in your natural server view. You can use that to easily switch libraries and even environments by just clicking on another one in there, which is both very handy and a little bit dangerous, because if you're trying to run something out of a specific library and you click into another one, you will be logged into that library, and you need to, it does list in the console, and I think I have shown in the next slide an image of that, which library you're currently in and which connection point you're on. So you shouldn't be too worried about that. Yeah, if you look at the very top or the very bottom, it tells you what library you're on and what connection you're using. And from there, you can just type in the name of the program that you would like to run, and it'll pull up the editor. And here I actually used the map that I showed before using the 3270 color scheme in the style sheet. So it looks pretty much like the 3270 editor does. All right, the debugger. The legwork for setting up the debugger for NaturalOne was all done by the natural admins. Kathy knows it very well. She's worked with it a lot. But we have the debug attach server executable and a permanent debug project set up in the Navigator that when you want to debug, you add your objects to that. And from there, all you have to do to set a breakpoint is just double click on the left-hand side of your program. And when you kick it off on the CICS side, one will connect and it will operate the breakpoints and show you the variables and work just like the debugger does before, but in my opinion, it looks a little bit cleaner. It's a basic overview, but like I said, this would need its own presentation to dig into the debug attach server and the debugger as a whole. Batch must be tested via the debug attach server because batch file allocation, unless you dynamically allocate the files internally in your programs, it's got to be done that way. So here is a screenshot of the debugger running on one of my test programs. This is the one that passes to that map that I showed before. It's very simple read and write. But as you can see, possibly, it's kind of small. I have highlighted in the top left the controls for the debugger. There's a play, a pause, a stop, a step through, a step into. Each of those obviously works like the debugger on the CICS side, but it's just a simple button click. And then it's a little bit hard to see, so they're circled or squared. dead center, there is a circle next to that move demo first name, and that's my breakpoint. And then you can see an arrow barely, like you can see my red arrow, but I'm highlighting, there is an arrow and that line is highlighted. That's saying that's the next line that will execute once I run it again. And on the right-hand side is the variables view. And you can see that it added that first name variable and updated it as it ran that breakpoint line. And if that changes, it'll change in the variables view, just like the debugger works before. Like I said, I believe it's a handy tool that makes things a little bit easier to view than the internal debugger. Other tips and tricks. These are things that I think are handy to know when you start using NaturalOne. So the first one is the line numbers in NaturalOne are not the natural line numbers, as I said before with the settings. But if you want to find a specific natural line number, if you're looking at an abend and you're trying to figure out why your code crashed on a certain line number, you can use Control-G and just enter in the natural line number, and it'll take you to whatever that line is. Control-F is a very handy way in all Windows systems to find and or replace specific things. I use it all the time when I'm looking for specific variables or comments, anything like that. You can quickly comment out a whole block of code by highlighting the block you want to comment out and then just using Control-7. Or once you have it highlighted, you can right-click and select Toggle Command Lines, and everything that's highlighted at the time will be immediately commented out. You can compare two objects that you have locally, and this is really handy because, as I've said, with the editor being malleable, you can drag around the views. You can actually drag in two different programs side by side already. But this function, if you have two objects, say you have an acceptance version of a program or a production, I guess we don't have a production mapping. I don't know about y'all's shops. But if you have an acceptance version of a program and a dev version of a program, and you're trying to see what the differences are, you can have them both pulled locally, select them both, and when you right click, there's a compare with option, and you can compare them to each other, and it will show you what the differences are in those two programs. If anything changes on your natural server side, you can just press F5 and it'll refresh it. This is useful if your connection is down or if you save something new and you want to make sure that it's on the mainframe side. Map processing rules are shown in the outline view of the map editor, and you can double click them to open up the processing rules. You can move a whole highlighted area of code by highlighting it with the mouse and then using the Alt button, holding it down, and using the arrow keys. Alternatively, just like most Windows applications, you can cut, copy, and paste, which is pretty nice. And if you cannot access an object and the object is not locked, use the project menu clean function to clear any corrupted from your workspace. This is really handy. A lot of the issues that other programmers are running into, something weird's happening, they're not sure, and they ask me or Greg or the admins, the first thing we always tell them to do is clean their project. It's very handy and fixes about 80% of issues unless there's a real problem going on. But sometimes there's corruption in the connection settings to the server, and it just causes issues on the client side. But if you have your users run the clean function, or if you're having issues and run the clean function, a good 80% of the time, it'll fix whatever you're going through. All right.
I think I surprised Kobe with this one.
Yeah, I did not see this before.
I threw this one in as a prize for everyone who stayed till the end of the presentation. This is a link to a free NaturalOne self-paced training course that Software AG has out on their site that all of you probably want to take advantage of. So you might want to take a screenshot of this screen so that you can go there today before you have access to download this slide deck and check it out. It has a full agenda listed. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by what you find in that training course. And again, you can contact any of us that are listed on the questions contacts list. Just email what your question is. I think you can even put all of us on a single email, and the first one that can get to you can hopefully answer your question. And
Kathy,
whatever questions we're emailed directly, we're going to share with Patrick and Nicole so that they can keep a running list of questions that hopefully someday will end up on being on a frequently asked questions page of some sort. Patrick?
Hey, Kathy. We do have some questions. Do you want to take a few now, and
Sure.
then we will, we can answer the rest later. But there are some that pertain to you specifically.
Okay.
One being from David Gurr. He asks, "What issues have you had with calling non-natural? Is that why you have and runs the CICS NDV, so you can run code that invokes non-natural written in OS or CICS style?" I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but it'd be good to hear from you.
So there are different things that work or don't work when you're trying to if you're trying to use NaturalOne where you say run as a natural program. I recommend that you always execute on your mainframe and do your debugging there, because your mainframe does have all of those interfaces and does have all of your load libraries accessible to it. Whatever you're going to run from the natural command console in NaturalOne, you must have those programs that you're going to call allocated to your Ndv server. So if you have a COBOL library that is not allocated in your Ndv server, or for the batch Ndv server, or is not allocated to your CICS region that you're going to pass work to, that call may not work if you're trying to execute from inside the NaturalOne environment itself through the command console, the natural command console. So some of the things that you're trying to run locally may or may not work. If it doesn't work, I would check what do you have allocated to your Ndv server or to the CICS region your Ndv server with the CICS adapter is connected to. Also, on one of the slides, we put a comment about if you have special front-end processing in your natural CICS environment, you're not going to get that necessarily executing the same way when you try to execute from directly inside the NaturalOne tool. And that's why when I questioned Software AG about that, I said, if I have an Ndv server and it has a CICS adapter and it's passing all the work, how come everything doesn't work? Well, it just has to do with that environment and the way that environment is communicating. But if you execute on your mainframe and communicate through that debug attached server to NaturalOne, everything that works in your regular world will work in that manner because you are executing in your regular world where all of your resources are already allocated via the load libs that are allocated to your CICS region, or any of your natural CICS parameters that you have applied in your regular natural CICS world or in your SysParm profiles. I hope that sufficiently answered that question.
Yeah, that was good, Kathy.
If you still have questions about that, contact me offline and we can have a discussion, and I'll explain in more detail.
Yeah, and I have all the questions cut and pasted off into a Word document, and I'll make sure we answer them all. Mm-hmm. And depending on the question will depend if I just talk directly to the person or if we make it a global answer.
Okay.
But I guess the one question, and I know the answer, Kathy, is just maybe explain your code migration option, because you're a big pack user. Some people are asking that, and then also regard to your, are you going to move to local mode in the future, or are you going to stick with the server mode?
I do want to cover all of that. Right now, we are working in server mode because we are a pack shop. And when you work with NaturalOne in local mode with a source code repository such as Git or Subversion or whatever else is out there, that repository kind of works on the premise that you have one master copy of your source. But in our mainframe environment, we have a very complex application lifecycle, and we have 2 development paths. And at any given time, a programmer may need to start their source code editing from the production version versus the last version that got moved to the test environment that's about to get moved into production. So since we have 2 development paths going on in our pack world, we haven't yet figured out how a source code repository working in local mode would factor into all of that. Pack works very well for us. We've customized it over the years. So the way we normally work is we're using NaturalONE basically as a code editor software emulator. We still check out programs from production or acceptance test into development on the mainframe. And then the programmer will edit all that code from NaturalONE. And when they're done editing, they save or stow it to the server, and then they use Pack to migrate it forward to the test environment and on into production. There is one thing I do want to mention, that for the debug attached server to work, you have to be running in what is considered local mode. And the difference between local mode and server mode is when you're working in server mode, if you open an object in NaturalONE by double clicking, it will open it into a temporary project. And that temporary project keeps its mapping to the server. And you edit your code and you save it or stow it, and it saves it and stows it on the mainframe. When you're working in local mode, that's when you right click a server object and say add to a new or an existing project. That keeps the object locally, the source is only updated in your NaturalONE local copy. In order for you to save that work to the server, you have to right click and do some special commands to tell it to save it to the server. The debug attached server can only be used when you're working with your NaturalONE objects in local mode, where you open it by right clicking and saying add to new or existing project. That debug attached server has not yet been made to work with objects you open in server mode. So when you get ready to debug, that's why Colby was saying we have all of our debug objects handled a different way. That was what he was referring to, because you actually have to add it to a project locally in order to run that debug attached server. I hope that sufficiently answered that.
Yeah, that was good. I think it's time to start winding down. This has been a great session. Thanks, Kathy and Colby. I think you were both brilliant. And
Yeah.
this will be recorded. I mean, as it has been recorded, so you will be able to log back on and watch this presentation again. I will get with Kathy and Colby, and we will get all these questions answered, and we'll find the best mechanism to post those back to you. And if you have any more questions, just feel free to, as you can see, Kathy has provided the emails there, and you're welcome to email myself just at patrick.gould@softwareagov.com. So I think with that, we can wind this down, and I think it was a very successful first user group webinar, and we hope to find some more exciting topics and do this again shortly.